little bird. Its name was Enza. I opened up the window, and influenza.
At the close of World War I, an enemy far deadlier than the Japanese onslaughts or the German mustard gas spread across the world at an inhuman speed, killing 675,000 Americans in merely 1 year. The 1918 influenza had arrived, a turning point in history which not only impacted medicine, but also completely changed the public's perspective on disease itself. The influenza, more commonly known as the flu, is a contagious disease caused by RNA viruses. The influenza virus is subdivided into serotypes. One of these serotypes is H1N1, which not only caused the 1918 pandemic, but also the more recent swine flu epidemic. It is tough to figure out how the 1918 flu originated, because at the time, the common flu was not significant enough of a disease to be reported. However, in March 1918, at a military hospital in Haskell County, Kansas, officials sent a report to the Public Health Service describing 18 cases of a severe form of influenza, 3 of which surprisingly ended in death. Meanwhile, halfway across the country, the flu was spreading at Camp Devens in Massachusetts at an alarming rate. One doctor at Camp Devens recorded,
"This epidemic started about 4 weeks ago and has developed so rapidly that the camp is demoralized and all ordinary work is held up till it has passed. These men start with what appears to be an ordinary attack of la grippe or influenza, and when brought to the hospital, they very rapidly develop the most vicious type of pneumonia that has ever been seen."
First, it's just like a regular case of the flu. People have a fever, they're kind of achy, regular kind of cold symptoms, congestion, and their fever would go up quite dramatically, so that would be literally just burning hot, maybe 105, 106, even 107 degree temperature. They also were drowning eventually in their own bodily fluids. Their lungs would begin to fill, and so they would eventually turn their extremities, their faces would begin to turn blue and purple, and even darker shades. And if they were dying, eventually they would often begin to bleed from their ears, their nose, their mouths, eyes.
During most of the first wave of the influenza, not many people knew what it was. News dominating the headlines of every major newspaper was about the Great War, the suffragettes, or the Red Sox winning the World Series. Most of the public just thought that there was some sort of disease spreading through Europe, an issue too far from home to really matter. Then, in late August of 1918, the second wave of the flu struck the US, mutated and more lethal than ever. On September 23rd, the Army officially recognized that over 20,000 troops were sick with influenza in Massachusetts alone. However, the true number was much higher than that. By September 26th, the flu had appeared in the Puget Sound area, the San Francisco Bay Area, Mississippi, Georgia, and almost every other part of the country. Suddenly, the flu was of higher priority than the war. Rumors about the pandemic and how to cure it were everywhere. Some people took advantage of the hysteria. Chiropractors had advertised that coming to their clinic would cure the flu. Elsewhere, homeopathic remedies claimed to be the cure. Some people believed that the influenza was the work of the devil. This disease was nicknamed the Spanish flu because since Spain was not involved in World War I, it had no wartime censorship. As a result, people all across the US and Europe found out that in Spain, people were dying in great amounts of an odd type of influenza, the same influenza which they had seen afflicting their neighbors. Even still, people had their doubts. The madness surrounding the war was causing chaos and paranoia, and it was leading people to believe other things about how the influenza began. Colonel Philip S. Doane said,
"It would be quite easy for one of these German agents to turn loose Spanish influenza germs in a theater or some other place where large numbers of persons are assembled. The Germans have started epidemics in Europe, and there's no reason why they should be particularly gentle with America."
However it began, The flu pandemic was killing people at an incredible rate. There was nothing that doctors could do. While they could diagnose the disease, they couldn't cure it, no matter what they tried. As a result, nurses became more valuable than doctors. A common message sent to hospitals was, "Can send all the doctors you want, but not one nurse." They took care of the patients until their inevitable death, and people were dying at higher rates than ever before. More people died in 1 year of the 1918 influenza than who died in all 4 years of the bubonic plague. The pandemic had completely baffled health professionals. Normally, infants and seniors over the age of 60 had the highest death rates in any epidemic. The 1918 pandemic, however, primarily killed young adults ages 20 to 40. The influenza was spreading rapidly in the Army and in the Navy as well. The close troop quarters and massive troop movements had hastened the spread of the pandemic, increased its transmission, and increased the lethality of the virus in general. The soldiers' immune systems were already weakened by the malnourishment they had experienced while in the Army, and the stresses of combat that they had to face. Some say that more soldiers died in German armies than American, and that may have led to Germany's defeat in World War I. Not only that, but the pandemic largely impacted civilian life. As the disease spread, social interaction depleted. Theaters, churches, stores, and even schools shut down. Many homes and schools had to be turned into makeshift hospitals, and even still there was a shortage of nurses and doctors. Citizens everywhere were ordered to wear masks. In Seattle, a woman wasn't allowed to ride a public bus without a mask on. In reality, however, these masks didn't protect anyone from the disease. Regulations put a ban on spitting and coughing without your mouth covered. Some officials even quarantined communities and even entire small towns. The flu also had a devastating effect on the economy. Several businesses and factories had to shut down since too many employees were sick for them to continue. Mail delivery and garbage collection was put on halt due to the influenza. Some farms couldn't harvest crops because of a lack of workers, and even health departments were sometimes closed.
There may not be enough people to perform funeral rites. And then in addition, there are rules placed around holding funerals. So in some cities, you can only have adult, immediate family relatives who are healthy. In other cases, you cannot hold it in a public place if you want to have the body. The sort of family responsibility to the person who's passed that many religious traditions embrace was really undercut. And when you add to that, again, the sort of public chaos in some places where there was nowhere to put the bodies.
Then, as abruptly as it began, the pandemic ended. It is difficult to pinpoint exactly when this happened. The pandemic was definitely not a worldwide threat anymore in the spring of 1919, but variants of the disease continued in the United States throughout 1920. There is a fair amount of controversy as to how many people became afflicted with the influenza and how many people died. Most historians agree that over 25% of the nation's population suffered cases of the influenza in 1918 and 1919. In total, the pandemic killed more people than who died in World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and the Korean War combined. The 1918 flu pandemic was an assassin more efficient and more lethal than any other during that time period. It is a turning point in history, remembered for the change it has caused in medicine and in society. After the pandemic, a new field of medicine called virology was created, and in the early 1930s, the human influenza virus was isolated. We have learned a lot from the 1918 influenza. If a similar outbreak were to occur today, much fewer people would die, since we are now educated about influenza, prepared, and vigilant. Unlike in 1918, when an outbreak happens, a vaccine is made ready as quickly as possible, preventing the spread of disease. We will always remember the losses we have faced due to this horrific tragedy 95 years ago.
It was the flu pandemic and it swept the whole world wide. It killed soldiers and civilians and they died. Whether lying in the trenches